Welcome back. There are places designed to process objects so efficiently that they begin to treat people the same way. Places where inventory matters more than memory, where lights stay on not because someone is working, but because something hasn't finished counting yet. Tonight's story isn't about getting lost. It's about a place that continues working long after it should have closed. I used to work third shift at an old distribution center off Highway 99. It was one of those massive concrete warehouse blocks that looked like it had been lowered into place sometime in the late 80s and then quietly forgotten. The outside security lights hummed constantly, even during daylight. At night, the interior fluorescents never fully shut off. When breakers tripped, they dimmed, but they never went dark. Someone once joked that if the power grid failed, that building would stay lit out of habit. The aisles ran farther than they logically should, long enough that forklifts disappeared into them like ships sliding into fog, long enough that after a few hours, your footsteps stopped sounding like yours and started sounding like someone walking just slightly out of sync beside you. My job was restocking overflow shelving in the back quadrants, discontinued inventory, replacement parts, and old fixtures that stayed in the system because deleting them caused accounting problems. Most employees rotated through the back quadrants once or twice and then found reasons not to return. Certifications expired suddenly. Knees started hurting. Scheduling conflicts appeared. Supervisors never argued. They simply reassigned the stops to my route. I didn't mind. The back was quiet, and third shift pays you in quiet. The first time I noticed something wrong was 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. I had just finished scanning D14, the shelving filled with discontinued printer paper nobody had ordered in years. I cut through what everyone called the yellow corridor, a long stretch of empty safety-painted racking separating active stock from the oldest section of the building. The paint was flaking in long, curling strips, and the concrete always felt colder there. The overhead lights buzzed louder than anywhere else in the warehouse, a steady 60 hertz drone that vibrated through your molars if you stood still long enough. I was pushing an empty pallet jack, and the wheels squeaked with each rotation. Halfway down the corridor, the squeak stopped matching. It sounded like there was one extra wheel turning half a beat behind mine, not echoing, following, keeping pace just slightly delayed, like it was adjusting itself to match me. I stopped walking, but the extra squeak continued for 2 rotations after mine stopped before fading. I stood there long enough to convince myself it was bearings or acoustics or exhaustion. When I started moving again, the extra sound didn't return, which bothered me more than if it had stayed. A week later, it happened again in the same corridor at the same time. That time, the lights blinked once. Not a brownout flicker or ballast stutter, but a clean, singular blink, like someone testing a switch to confirm power still existed. The hum changed afterward. It didn't grow louder, just lower, like the pitch dropped half an octave for a few seconds before correcting itself. I told myself it was aging wiring, but I started taking the long way around the corridor anyway. It added 10 minutes to my route, and nobody noticed. Then came the night the door to Quadrant E stopped existing. Quadrant E was the oldest part of the building, originally a separate structure before expansion crews punched through and connected it. One gray metal fire door led inside. It was always locked from the office side, but warehouse keys opened it. Inside was dead stock, obsolete conveyor parts, and crates labeled in handwriting that didn't match any employee still on payroll. We weren't supposed to go in unless scanners directed us. That shift, a conveyor in D12 jammed, and the system flagged E as storage for replacement rollers. I walked the yellow corridor past the last active rack and into the section where motion sensors thinned out and lights took longer to brighten after detecting movement. The door should have been there, but it wasn't. There was only more corridor. The same peeling paint, the same lighting, the same hum. The wall extended forward like it had always been built that way. No seam, no hinge outline, no dust pattern suggesting anything had ever interrupted it. I stared long enough that my breathing started syncing with the electrical buzz overhead before turning around to get a supervisor. The corridor behind me looked longer than it had 30 seconds earlier. The last active rack sat farther away than it should have, and the lights dimmed slightly, not flickering, but lowering one level at a time, like someone adjusting a dimmer while watching me decide whether to keep moving. I walked back quickly, then slower when the distance didn't close the way it should. The hum followed me, constant and patient. By the time I reached the rack again, my phone read 3:42 a.m. I had walked less than 40 feet, and it had taken 25 minutes. I didn't tell anyone. The next shift, I brought a roll of fluorescent orange hazard tape, the kind we use to mark broken shelving. I laid a strip across the floor, right where the yellow corridor began, something physical and measurable. When I walked back to Quadrant E, the door was there again. Same dents, same peeling authorized personnel sticker curling at the corners. My key turned. The lock clicked. Inside smelled like dust, cardboard, and carpet backing that had absorbed moisture decades earlier. I found the replacement roller in the third box I checked, closed the door, locked it, and walked back. The tape was gone. Not peeled, not shifted. Gone. The concrete was smooth and clean, unmarked in every direction. I checked my pockets. The roll remained half used. I clearly remembered laying it down and stepping over it. That was when sleep stopped working normally. I would lie in bed, listening to the refrigerator motor cycle on and off, and hear warehouse lighting inside it. When I closed my eyes, I saw yellow walls stretching forward in straight lines that refused to stay straight if I stared too long. 2 weeks later, I tried measuring. I clocked in early before second shift cleared out and walked the corridor while forklifts were still running. I counted steps using my phone pedometer. From the last rack to the E door was 87 steps. I repeated it twice and got the same count. That night at 3 a.m., I walked the same route again. 87 steps brought me to empty corridor. I kept walking. At 200 steps, the lighting dimmed enough to tint the floor gray. At 300, the hum developed a slow warble, like audio tape stretching under heat. At 400, I smelled stale soda syrup soaked into carpet fibers that hadn't existed in that building for decades. At 500 steps, aisle markers appeared on racks, handwritten tags with numbers that didn't exist in our inventory system. My scanner stopped registering location pings, but continued logging movement anyway. At 612 steps, the wall softened at the edges, losing the certainty of 90-degree corners. Ceiling tiles bulged upward like Something heavy had pressed against them long ago and never fully left. I stopped walking. The overhead lights stabilized, and the hum matched my breathing rhythm. When I turned around, the walk back took longer. Not because the hallway stretched, but because every step felt heavier, like the floor resisted me in fractions of an inch. Halfway back, an intercom crackled overhead, even though that corridor didn't have speakers. The voice never formed words, just syllables and numbers, followed by a scanner tone repeating politely, as if waiting for a barcode to be presented. When I reached the last rack again, it was 4:19 a.m., and the orange tape lay across the floor exactly where I had first placed it weeks earlier, bright and undisturbed. I left it there. 3 nights later, my scanner added a new task between 2 legitimate stops. It simply read, "Recount, Quadrant E." I hadn't requested it, and there was no supervisor note attached, just a blinking confirmation button. When I opened the door to E, boxes were stacked too neatly, and pallets were shrink-wrapped with inventory tags that didn't match company formatting. One pallet had a handwritten tag that read, "Back count." My scanner vibrated once and displayed, "Item added," with no SKU number before returning to my route. I left without finishing the recount, and nobody mentioned it. A few nights later, I overheard Carl, one of the oldest forklift operators, arguing quietly with a supervisor near the charging stations. He stopped talking when he noticed me. Later, he found me alone in receiving and asked what zones I was running that night. When I told him the back quadrants, he nodded slowly and asked if my scanner had been giving me anything extra lately. When I asked what he meant, he mentioned tasks that didn't show on printed routes. I hesitated, and he took that as confirmation. He told me that if it ever added a recount, I shouldn't volunteer to finish it. When I asked what recounts were, he said he didn't know officially, but he had noticed the system started assigning them before people stopped getting overtime. He explained that schedules sometimes stopped printing certain names. Management would say those employees transferred, but HR still listed them as active, just unassigned. He told me recounts sometimes appeared in scanner histories after those employees were already gone, like they had finished work nobody ever saw them do. I tried to laugh and suggested they probably quit, but Carl shook his head and said payroll kept issuing numbers to employees who stopped showing up. He told me that if my scanner asked me to recount something that didn't exist, I shouldn't stay late trying to fix it, then walked away like the conversation had never happened.